Can you guys all see this?
Yeah.
So, what is visual development? Um, Different studios have different pipelines, but they're, all somewhat similar. Um, for whatever reason, in video games, it's usually called concept art, and in animated film, it's usually called visual development. Um, but what is it? It roughly can split into two categories: pre-production art and production notes here to make sure I talk about the differences. Okay, so pre-production art. So in a studio environment, if you're working on a film, there's a phase called pre-production. This is the storyboard phase and the very early concept art phase. It's where they're kind of working out story, script, and 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 artwork. And most of the artwork in this pre-production phase is sometimes it's called blue sky artwork, but they're mostly mood paintings. And I've created a little board here of one of my favorite artists. It's Nathan Fowkes. I'm sure many of you have heard of him. Um, but he does these great paintings. But the purpose of these paintings, that's what I want to talk about is purpose of them. The purpose of them is to convey mood or atmosphere. These paintings will be shown to the director of the film, and uh, they'll be shown to try and help determine. I'm just going to go through and kind of scroll through some of these, help determine sort of the atmosphere. Now, these aren't strictly pre production, these are actually background production art, but you get the idea. Like this is would be pre production. This is a mood painting. Um, they would probably come to Nathan like we have this idea of this ancient civilization living in this magical world. It's sort of loosely based on maybe like Chinese architecture or something. Can you paint us something? And then he would go and he would make like five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10 paintings of different things that he was like, I think this looks cool. What do you think of this? The director would look at it and be like, oh, this is good. I kind of like this direction more than this direction. Make a few more. And usually a studio, like a big studio, would hire quite a few artists. I don't know how many, 10 or so, maybe more. Um, and just gather as many different ideas as possible. Then the director will kind of filter through them and be like, I like this one, not so much this one. Um, and then they start getting like a cohesive visual kind of look, right? So pre-production artists usually are contract based and they're very early. They're usually stay a production on for, I don't know, maybe a year, sometimes less. Um, and then it sort of helps establish the visual tone of the movie. So it's almost always painting. And the reason why it's almost always painting is color and light convey mood and convey atmosphere. And you can see here that, like this Ferdinand painting from the movie Ferdinand, like this is great. Um, but you can see that there's a lot, like if I zoom in here, well, one, it's kind of low res, but even if it weren't, you can see that there's a lot of stuff that is suggested detail, not necessarily completely fleshed out. Like I can assume that this is, I don't know, some sort of a crop or farm or grove. This looks like some sort of, Tuscan inspired house, some kind of sprawling cityscape that leads to this, this tower. And um the point that I'm making is it's suggested detail, but it's not really called out. Let's find another one. Here we go. I can't remember what this one was from. I don't think it was Shrek. Um, but it could have been. I don't know. A movie he worked on with these like you can see here this I can see like this is oh this kind of looks like a tent. There's some sort of sharpening wheel that he's on. He's got like a bag of axes he's sharpening. He's got an axe to grind. A cauldron, a fire. But you can see that much of the detail is very loose. And that's how it's supposed to be for these, because the purpose isn't, again, it's not about getting granular with what these things are. It's about the mood and overall atmosphere. And that's very important with pre-production artwork. So moving into production artwork, we get artwork that's a little more like this. This is an artist named Michael Isaac, and he worked on the Goat movie. I think he was a production designer on it. I can't remember exactly. But you can see that this is much more specific, right? You take they take the pre-production art and the storyboards, and then they give the art and the story beats to a production artist, and they're like, well, we have a scene that takes place in a dentist office. We need to know what that dentist office looks like. We need to know more specifically what it looks like, because somebody is going to take the artwork and actually build it in 3D. So the point that I'm trying to make is, when it comes to visual development, when you're called a viz dev artist, visual development artist, you fall into two main categories, and many artists do both, but pre-production art and production art. Pre-production art is usually shorter term. They usually get paid a pretty good wage. Production artists get paid fair wage too, and they're usually longer term. So let's look at some production art. You can see here's the stadium, and it looks to me like this is probably a rough 3D render that was given to him by a 3D modeler, or perhaps he modeled it himself and then pulled it into Photoshop and has, drawn over it. And that happens a lot, is drawing over 3D models. This one's strictly a 3D model. Let's go into one that's a drawing. Here we have, I haven't actually seen Goat yet, so I don't know the character's name, but here we have like his bedroom or his apartment, right? And things are called out. There's also a lot of great storytelling elements here. Like, we learn a little bit about this guy. Like, he's clearly a big basketball fan. He's got this little hoop set up here. He's got RBA 2K 2025 he's playing on his video game system. He's like a typical teenager. This also shows me that he probably doesn't have a whole lot of money. He's living in this cramped space. His kitchen is right next to his bed. It's all very tight and close together. He hasn't taken the trash out in a while. He's got his records here. It's got all his basketball hats hanging up. All this kind of stuff is called set dressing. And it really creates an environment that is exciting to look at and interesting. And like I was saying before, the environment itself is a character, both in its shape language and in its storytelling, right? Like, we get some wonky shapes and things here. But one of the biggest storytelling elements here is just the cluttered and crampedness of this environment. What does that say about this character? To me, it says he cares more about basketball than necessarily he does about his environment. Like his focus is on uh he's got like his jerseys hanging up, basketball trophy, um looks like a bong here. uh Little horse playing basketball, you know, his video game, his hoop, all of his basketball shoes, and but his half-eaten pizza, open pizza box, spaghetti still sitting on the stove, pots, pans stacked up. It tells us where this character's focus is. And the other thing about it is it's more specific in the design. If this were a painting, it might be like a few strokes here to represent clutter, right? Right. But in production design, you need to be a little bit more specific. So I would say, speaking in generalities, production design has a bit more drawing in it than painting. Um, and if there is painting, which there is, like this is painted, things are more specifically called out. It's like these are vines. Whereas like in a Nathan Fowkes painting, it might just be a loose brushstroke. It's like, I don't know what it is. It's some sort of foliage. Right. So production art specific. Production art um, is also has a lot of these sort of things, call outs, right? Like they may have a scene, like I haven't seen Goat, but I'm guessing they have the scene where they play on these different types of um, basketball courts, right? Here we got like a lava one. But you can see how he's called things out with notes, right? And he's like, okay, the ground is like a hexagonal shape. And here we got like lava coming out where the lines are. And then, you know, he's like, okay, here's another kind of establishing shot of what that might look like. But then we'll do a call out, we'll get specific. Be like, okay, here's how the score um whatever, the scoring screen is going to the scoreboard is going to look. We'll have like chains and gears and things holding it. And all this is so that the modelers, the 3D modelers and the surfacing departments can understand exactly how to build the thing that you want to build, right? So this is where it starts, mood, atmosphere. Then it goes to this, specifics, drawing, detail. And then it'll go from here to the 3D modeling departments, and they will actually build the things. This is another great artist, Matthias Lechner. He was the production designer on Zootopia, the first one. And all these great, you can see he's figuring things out like shape, language, design. Production artist is really problem solving. It's taking the script and the pre-production art and being like, okay, how do we actually make this into a movie? Like these are really pretty paintings, and this is an interesting idea. Um, Now we need to get specific. Like, what are the shapes of the buildings? What are what kind of plants live in this environment? What kind of buildings? What kind of vehicles? What kind of things do they use? How do we make a set and dress it up with these things so that it looks interesting? It looks like people are using it. Um, yeah. So I have all this is amazing work. And if you guys take the course, I'm going to be sharing with you actually a huge library of images, both artists, but also like good reference. I want to take a moment and say that um, the most artists are or the people that really succeed in this industry. How can I put it? Usually, okay, so most of the difference between good artists or between like professionals and non-professionals are the quality of their reference. So, and the quantity. I find that a lot of artists, and myself included, when I was starting out, didn't use nearly enough. And also, I didn't gather it in the right place. I would say Google is more like your last resort. Google and Pinterest should be your last place of gathering reference, not your first. Um, your first place should be uh, your phone or a good camera if you have one. Get out of your door, go to museums, go to gardens, go around your town and take photos. And the way I like to do it is actually um, in categories. You can see here if I go to my go to my art reference folder here. I've got a bunch of artists here. Um, let me find one. Oh, here's France. So I took a bunch of pictures when I was in France. When I studied with I took a workshop with Will Weston there, who's amazing. Um, but categories. So one of my categories is architecture, right? So I went and took photos of architecture. So think about a category of things that happen in animated films, and I can give you a bunch. Um, architecture, foliage, ground. What does the ground look like? Ground cover. Um, stonework. Um, I have to go and think, but I mean, I have a bunch, but so okay, here we go. I got architecture, right? Oh, another place to go if you have the ability are theme parks, right? Because theme parks are really interesting because a lot of design work has actually been done already. They've looked at architecture and props and they have designed it and are building it in a way that looks interesting to look around. So if you go to any kind of themed entertainment place, it's really great reference, right? Like these things here. These are like, French architecture, but highly simplified. Um, and that's what animation is too. It's usually like simplified. Usually, at least most of the animation that we see, which is mostly for kids. I mean, even adult animation is simplified. But like this, this is like Arabian kind of architecture, but highly simplified. So it's a great place to go to um, get reference. Here we got Gothic architecture, right? Things like this, stone steps. I'm like, oftentimes I see people draw a building on a ground plane. It's like, well, the grounds are uneven, and there's usually like some sort of uh, threshold to get into a building. So things like this, these little architectural details are so important. And if you have these saved on your computer or a place where you can easily get to them, it's going to be much easier than if you have to go searching the internet every time you need something. Um, here's a whole bunch of shacks, right? and these are taken from the internet, but here's a bunch of style guides I've got. I'm trying to think of what's Zion's National Park, right? So if I have to create some sort of rocky landscape, rather than getting on Pinterest and typing in rocky landscape, I'll be like, I'm pretty sure I took a whole bunch of photos. Let me go to my reference file first. And I'm going to be sharing a lot of this reference with you guys so that you can just jump in and get started. And then as you grow, you can figure out what types of things you like to draw. And yeah, and gather your own reference. But I'm a big believer in gathering your own reference. So, I've got sums of like submarines and lots of cool stuff. So it's and I find that most animated films fall into like kind of categories, right? There's like adventure themes or sci-fi themes or uh, kind of like city themes. So if you can think about those themes, you can sort of start categorizing your reference. It's like, all right, I'm gonna go wander around Los Angeles or um, Mumbai or wherever, whatever city, and I'm just gonna take random pictures, or not random, but like pictures of the cityscape, and I'm gonna save those in a folder. So now if I need to draw a cityscape, I got a bunch of reference right here. And then I use this great program called PureRef, which allows me to, I can just take any reference file here. I got to find one that's like low res. But I could just like take a handful and it'll just open it up and organize it, right? And this thing called PureRef, it's like $5. So it's really worth it. And I can just zoom in and be like, okay, yeah, I like this, but I like this from this thing. And you can have all your reference easily accessible. Here's a bunch of reference of foliage I took in Hawaii. So anytime I need to draw tropical plants, ferns, um, banana trees, bamboo, right? I can go seek out my reference. And if I have it all right here, it's going to be a lot easier to design something. Okay. So let me go ahead and talk about some of the work I've done for David. I think I was just going to pull that up here. Ron Baird art. Pull this up. Okay. So here's some of the artwork I did for David. So on David, I was a production artist. I mean, I was a visual development artist, working that production art space. So much of the style of the film was already established. It was my job to kind of flesh out the individual scenes. Well, mine and a handful of other artists, our jobs to flesh out the individual scenes and what they were. So like in this scene, there's a whole sequence where David is walking through this area where they're dyeing yarn and hanging it to dry. So we had to research a lot of let's see if I can just copy this. Nah, let's say we'll paste. But anyway, a lot of things you can see. There's yarn hanging here. There's dyeing. We had a dyeing pots that would be used for dyeing yarn. A lot of different materials. I put onions in here. I'm not sure they would have used onions for dye, but we also had to reuse a lot of items that we had already designed. So things like here, different different pigments, different pots. Maybe some undyed yarn here on a shelf, some strands here with yarn draped over it. um, nuts and shells, baskets that would indicate these are the things they're boiling down to create colors, pigments to use to create dye. And then back here are a whole bunch of like dyeing pots, right? Like big pots that they would stir yarn into. Like they take these small pots, dump them in the big pots, and stir yarn into. I want to stay in that space for a second. And then, right, more of the same, right? These dyeing pots, and you got yarn hanging up here to dry. So you would like walk underneath this. And I was primarily like layout. I didn't do a ton of color. I did some. But here is another thing. This was actually used as an olive press, but we ended up using this as a dye pot as well. Because in animation, sometimes you build one asset and it's like, where else can we use this? Um, so you can see here, right? We do a drawing, but then we call it out. This is how these things should look. So a 3D modeler would hopefully be able to take this drawing, and they're artists as well, 3D modelers. So take it and interpret it and build it in 3D. Here we have a warp loom. I guess I should just go in order now. So here's a bread baking area. There's a sequence where we see David's mother. I think it got cut from the film, but she's like baking bread. And anyway, this was that area, right? So you have these two big ovens. And you have to think like, well, what would they have if they're baking bread, right? Like, and that's always a trick to dress a set. It's like, okay, they're gonna have to start fires. So we'll have to put logs, maybe a wood splitting area, a grinding stone, maybe a pestle and mortar, if they want to grind up the flour. Um, Maybe there's just a pot here with, already ground flour. These were dates and, little onions and garlic. And, maybe they got thirsty, want to take a drink while they're out here. Different shelves. Maybe they put the finished bread out here. Um, sacks of flour, different things to, you know, uh, season the bread with, rugs and stuff. So if they have to be like kneel and grinding, their knees don't get tired or they have something to sit on. So these are all the kind of things you have to think about when designing, This is all like set dressing, and I find dressing a set to be really fun, actually. This is an olive press area. So you pour the olives in here and crush them. And I think maybe we'll go a little bit over the time if everybody's okay with that. But if you gotta jump, that's totally fine. So we got some clay weights, right? Like building out a warp loom. These were not my character designs. These were a guy named Tom Van Reenen, who's amazing. Here we go, some more dyeing pots, right? Like these are call outs. You do a big drawing and then you get granular. You take pieces of that drawing and you call them out in more detail. This was sheep's horn, leather lashing, wooden stick. And that's what they used to scoop the dye out of. Here, you can even see, I've drawn a little bit of cross contour lines so they can understand the form of these things. And right, we'd already actually modeled this basket. So I didn't take much time modeling a basket. I just or like drawing out a basket. I was just like, use this basket, give it this shape, throw a handle on it. Sometimes in animation too, you have to work quickly. So some things look a little loosey-goosey. This was Goliath's tent in the film. We had again, we had a rough painting, like a beautiful pre-production painting of this tent, and it had this interesting shape with these pillars on it. But we needed to like call out like how is it actually built. So I'm like, all right, well, we have all these, you know, um, posts, and they'd be, tacked or uh, some rope. They'd be staked to the ground. And then maybe we have these two big posts and there's like a rope going through here and a large piece of cloth draped over. And then we cut some holes in it just because I thought it looked kind of cool, like some little windows, some airflow, and put some little jingly jangly things on it because we actually designed Goliath or the Philistines in the film after Gustav Klimt. Uh, and if you've seen his artwork, his famous piece, The Kiss. Um, but he has all this beautiful pattern work, and we're like, it'd be really great to incorporate that into this design of these people. So we have all these like patterns and just lots of little ornamentation. And then here was the inside. Originally, we had a little area back here that somebody was supposed to come through, and I think we cut that out of the film. So, um, but yeah, just dressing the set. We're like, okay, he would eat a lot, so maybe we'll have like a whole pig, and we just got like all kinds of different pots and things. Um, this is pretty grisly, no pun intended, but these were actually bears that were like, sewn up and were his cushions. Because Goliath is a pretty huge guy. And then there was a harp where you had somebody playing harp for him. And then my art director actually recommended this. He's like, what if we have all the rugs kind of swirling around him? So it kind of everything feels like it's just orbiting around the character, which was Goliath when he was right here. So,
Ron, there's a question on the chat.
oh, okay,
Can I
great. What is
can,
it?
can I say? Yeah. Looks like a fun job, but what would you say is the most challenging, difficult aspect of the job?
The most challenging. I would say probably one of the most challenging is just having a blank page and having to come up with something. Um, and the easiest way to get around that again is I think is reference. You need to be inspired by something from real life to create something. You can't create in a vacuum. Nothing comes from nothing. So if they're like, almost well, not almost every single job, if I have a design assignment, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do research, and I'm going to do a lot of research. And only after I've done a lot of research do ideas start flowing. Drawing is the least difficult part. I mean, drawing is difficult to learn, but thinking is probably the hardest part of the job. Um, so, this was a rig for uh, putting, that would go on a camel. So we had blankets that were rolled up and stuff. This was another one. We're like, all right, we'll use the same rig. Here's how we'll dress it up. A lot of different market stalls. I'll be done here in a minute and then we'll get on to the demo. Um, Tables, benches, a lot of things that, we have to reuse. So it's like, uh, we had already built the shelf. It's like, let's just kind of take these slats and we'll elongate them, build out, some legs, and here's some reference for the lashings, and that's what we'll use to build the marketplaces. A handful of tables and benches that we can kind of arrange in different ways. Market stall, did a full turnaround on this guy. I don't know why. I just thought it would be fun to do. Um, yeah, this was a room where David is like washed and anointed. So a couple different scenes, right? Like, and I modeled this out very, very roughly in 3D so that I could get consistency, and then drew over the top. So you don't have to be a 3D wizard. I'm certainly not. These were not mine. This is Edwin Remriv, a fantastic 3D artist, but this is just to show how a concept design is translated into a 3D blockout, right? Here's my, where is it? right? Like these onions and sages and these different spices to kind of create an aromatic smell in this bathroom. And this is how he was like, yeah, and we'll like just build it out. And you can see, ideally, every single department actually pluses the design, right? Like the pre-production makes some beautiful paintings. I go in and get specific. Then the 3D artists like make it look really beautiful with their 3D stuff, and they change things as well. Because sometimes 2D things don't always work in 3 dimensions. So ideally, every department is sort of plussing things, but you can see how specific you have to get, right? Like these amphoras, these pots, like what holds them? Like they're clay; they can't just sit loosely in uh, in the back of a cart. So we need to design the thing that they, kind of fit into. And interestingly enough, those little details don't really get seen that well in the movie, but if they're not there, something feels missing, you know? And in animation, things don't need to necessarily be realistic, but they have to be plausible. It has to be like, I don't know if this thing would actually function for holding pots, but it looks like it probably could. So, that's good enough. Like in this case, they're like, the, they asked me, we need you to design this like sort of front area of Saul's palace. And I was given like a kind of a rough, really rough sketch. It's like, it was like roughly the shape. But there was they're like, we want a tree in there because the carts are going to circle a tree, and then there'll be like the palace, and then there'll be tents like lining stuff. And I'm like, it's not much to go on. So you sort of have to kind of come up with a lot. And then they bounce the information off of you. They're like, that's good, but we want to change it in this way. So you can see like, here's all the, call outs for it. And in the end, it becomes like this, right? And there's a whole bunch of artwork between then and there, right? Like I did a bunch of, scaffolding and stuff. And it's like, here's what everything kind of looks like. All right, let's go ahead to another question.
All right.
Do, 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 do. Thank you, Ron. Your draftmanship is amazing. Thank you. I wanted to ask about pre-production, production phases. How are the responsibilities typically divided among different experience and skill levels? How are the outputs split between entry level and senior artists? In general, is there generally an inclination to assign specific tasks such as color keys, mood paintings, for instance, to more experienced artists? And how does this work in the production phase, like layouts or prop output? Yeah, so usually just wherever your strengths are is probably like the production designer and art director will be like, well, let's allocate like I did a lot of drawing because I felt like that was my strength on David. I do color work as well, but there was other artists that were very experienced with color. And so I would do the drawing, they would do the color. They're faster at the color than I. And so, it's just like this artist is good at this thing. And if you're like more of a junior artist, like I was when I started on David, I was definitely a junior artist. Uh, I was just given less important tasks at first. So they're like, well, if it's not very good, it's not like it gets much screen time, or we can always like give it to somebody else to fix, you know. So that's usually how they'll do it. So the idea is like do a good job on those small projects, and then you'll get bigger ones. But usually they just play to people's strengths. So if there's somebody that is just like a great painter, they'll probably like on Sunrise, we have this guy Pedro. He's an amazing painter, and so he does a lot of color keys and stuff. And he's fast and he's loose, and it's really good. So how do you recognize your strengths and weaknesses, and how do you work on them? Good question. School, education, finding mentors. Um, Another good thing is like try and take some time just to be self-reflected. Like One good thing about having reference of different artists is like put up all the work of Matthias Lechner, for example, and then put yours next to it. Does it really stand out? Does it look out of place? If so, then you probably have some work to do. You just need to hold yourself, well, be satisfied with improvement, but you have to hold yourself to a high standard because that is what is expected. I mean, that's your competition. What sets or concept artists, production artists apart? Wait, what sets a concept artist or production artist apart through their portfolios? What do recruiters look for specifically? I think that to be most marketable, you have to have a bit of both. Like, have a few nice, pretty paintings, but then have specific stuff, like stuff like this, um, which I didn't have until after David. I didn't realize when I was in school what production art really was, um, or how the animated film pipeline kind of works. But the a hiring like a recruiter or a hiring manager is going to want to know that they can hire you and you can see a movie through this entire phase. So they want to know, like, oh, this person can do, so they know color, they can do these pretty mood paintings, but they can also get specific. They can do um they understand call outs. They can do like a room layout. They can cut the wall away, and um they can design more specifically. So if you only want to do these pre-production, which is fine, most of those guys I find are actually like fine artists. Nathan Fowkes, David Dibble, John Burton. These guys are like brilliant painters. They're all of them are also oil painters. And then they also work in sort of animation on the side. Um, so if you want to do that, go be a painter and work in animation. There's work out there for you, and they get paid really well, for a short amount of time to do that. But most of those pre-production artists are also uh what's the word, known quantities, like they're somewhat recognizable, or I want to say, I don't know if there's a better word than famous. They're like art famous. So they seek out these like known artists. Usually they're like, oh, that guy's great. I want to have him, Armand Serrano or something. I want to get some of his stuff in our film. So, yeah, I mean, yeah. Anyway, so I would say, like, having a little bit of that pre-production, beautiful mood paintings, as well as some of these more specific things, this more production art, makes you very marketable to an animated studio. Okay, thanks for sharing these. And then then you have to go find recruiters. And one of the best place to do that is LinkedIn. Post your stuff on LinkedIn, connect with the recruiters. And if you can, I know it's difficult in India, but if you can, like, go to conferences, go to Lightbox, or in the United States, or CTN, probably not CTN so much anymore, but Lightbox. So yeah, and then do everything you can to meet with them, right? If you can establish a personal connection, you have a far better chance of relying on that connection in the future. But if you can't get to them, LinkedIn is a good place too. More than just Instagram. You got to go for more than just Instagram. Okay, I'm a visual development student. I got a job, or wait, I got a good grab at the fundamentals, like observational drawing, but I'm just starting to learn about design and concept art. What exercises, study methods do you recommend? And so in general, who give some helps to want to make a leap? Um, let's go ahead and get into the demo. But first, Debbie said, "Hi Ron, how do you deal with art block? Because it takes me a while when I get stuck." The way I deal with art block is again having some good reference. Um, like this will go into the demo too. And a lot of this reference I've taken myself. Some of this reference I've gotten from other artists like Will Weston. Uh, Let me see if I can find a good cubes and boxes. This is one I got from Will Weston. It's really great. Let me go ahead and pull this up here. Oh, this is going to take a while to pull them all in. Well, let's just cancel it here then. Okay. Let me make this all a similar size. Look at all this, right? This is all reference that is based on a cube or a box, right? If you can draw a box well, you can probably draw most of this stuff. And isn't that cool? Like if I'm ever bored, I'm like, I don't know what to draw. I have art block. Um, Pop into here, grab some of your reference and get to work. Like, look how cool this is. And I'll show you just how easy it is to kind of draw this stuff. Let's go ahead and get in the demo. I'm pulling my reference over to the side here. So you won't be able to see it, but I'm looking at it. And let me find something interesting. Okay, here we go. I'm going to draw sort of this shack here. Um, okay. So I'm going to start with just a box, right? So when drawing a box, there's a couple things you can think about. Fannings and straight, right? So we know perspective, right? But I don't usually draw out my vanishing points or my lines, but I think about fannings and straights. Like this line. So first I'll draw like the front of the box. This line fans back. I'm saying there's a vanishing point somewhere over there. And then there's a straight down. And then this line fans, right? Fans back somewhere. And then I'll draw that line straight and have that one fan back, have that one fan back, and I actually might do a little bit of fanning downwards too to give the box a little bit of playfulness. Okay, so here's a trick if you don't already know. You draw an X on the front of your box that marks the center point. You pull it up. That's where I want my roof to be, right? I'll fan that line back. I'm going to connect these lines down. I'm not being too careful. I'm mostly eyeballing it. I'm gonna fan those back a little bit. Maybe I'll elongate this box a little bit. I make mistakes all the time. Don't think that most artists do. But you don't have to live with your mistakes. If you find you made a mistake, even though it may take some redrawing, go ahead and fix it. So let's talk about a little bit about proportions, right? Like, oftentimes we tend to make proportions too even, right? That's one half of this whole space. Not that interesting. Let's go ahead and do like 3/4 or something. This will be like the side door. This is running a bit laggy for me. Let me try and lower this. See if that helps a little bit. Um, So, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start playing with some of my design principles here. I'm going to exaggerate what I see on this tin roof. I see these flashings here. And this is an interesting tip I picked up from Will Weston, right? Even though you can see here on this form, on this flashing, I have one side, two sides, right? One side, two sides. But on these flashings, I've actually removed this thing. So it's just one side, one side, one side, right? This has two dimensions. This has one dimension. This is just a shape. What that does is that helps these come forward and these recede into the background. Interesting tip. Now, I want to create a lot of overlaps with this tin, right? I don't see as many overlaps as I'm going to make, but it's interesting. So I'm going to add them in. Now I'm going to use a little bit of, I've been mostly using line. Now I'm going to use some mass. Mass is just filled in shape, right? That's what mass is. I'm doing these little triangles and filling them in, and they indicate drop shadows. See how that works? See how I don't connect it here? That shows me that this is, slightly floating above. Now I want to create
Hello.
some,
I
yes,
have a
hello?
question. I noticed that you're using a plugin in Photoshop on the right side. What is the plugin?
Oh yeah, this is Coolerus. It's not too expensive. It's like $15 or something like that. It's just a handy little color wheel, so I don't have to go here and pick, right? Like I can just kind of move my little thing around here and choose a color that I like. But yeah, it's a really handy thing for color picking.
And what about
So,
the perspective tools?
oh, this was a plugin that I got and I don't really understand it. So I never really use it.
Fair enough.
Um, yeah, it's supposed to like create a perspective grid for you, but I don't know, it's a bit janky. I don't quite understand how it works. So I just kind of make my own perspective grids or eyeball it. One thing about perspective, which is really interesting, is you don't need to be a whiz at it. Um, Overlaps show um, depth more than perspective. Now, what I'm doing here, see how these lines don't connect, right? That's on purpose, right? This is visual rest. This is visual interest. I'm going to create, a few more of these corrugated iron fences. Not going to connect it so much here, right? This is visual interest. This is visual rest, right? Rest, interest, rest, interest. Helps your eye move across. If I were to add texture all over the place, like carry these lines all the way through and add some texture here, it's just too much visual interest everywhere. So it makes it hard. Now, what I'm doing here, I'm going to draw these little, circles and put a little shape underneath. I'm indicating like nails. Um, that's called evidence of manufacture. Uh, that's a very important thing to do in animation. You have to things, like I said, things don't necessarily need to make sense, but they have to feel plausible. So you need to put some evidence in there that tells me like this thing has been built. You know, these tin slats don't just stay here all on their own, right? They've been nailed down. Let's add some more mass in here. Mass is a great way to break up line. If you have too much line, it can get monotonous. Adding some mass, some shadow masses, helps it feel, kind of fresh again. Maybe I'll cut a hole in here, maybe indicate some sort of a beam on the inside. See how that works? Kind of interesting. And all this stuff you can do with very basic forms, right? Like cylinders, boxes. You can combine boxes. Right? Erase out some of those lines and put in a few of these guys here, and suddenly you have, a staircase. You can stack another box on top of here if you like. Put a door there. Make it a patio. Right? All these things are fairly simple. You can do them with the really basic shapes, right? And these are the kind of things that we're going to learn in this workshop. Let me go over a little bit of the things. So we're going to learn about line, shape, mass, which we've been talking a little bit, form, which are these basic 3D forms, and how we can use those to create different forms, right? Different surface textures. We're going to be talking about composition. This is another thing you're going to get. You'll get the layout notes for Aladdin, which is pretty cool. You can see how simple it is, right? A few simple shapes. We're adding some other shapes, and some shapes within those, adding in a bit of value. And suddenly you have some really cool pieces here, right? Like shape. This is all shape. Come up with some interesting shapes. Then your rendering on top of it is going to look really nice. We're going to go over some other professionals' work. This is some of the work from Marcello Vignali, from Mulan. Just break it down. Like these are very actually simple forms, but because he understands form, the detail on top of it really, really shines. Right here we have a couple boxes and a big ribbon, and that's really it. But underneath, you turn it into the Great Wall of China. We'll talk about proportional systems, right, which we talked about a little bit, trying to keep things from getting super even. Here I've drawn like a little king, like a big throne chair, and how proportions help us tell a story, right? Like 80% throne, 20%, seat and king here. Kind of tells the story that maybe he's got a little bit of little man syndrome. He wants to be a bigger deal than he is, but he's really thrown his title around to make him more powerful. also these proportional systems help create a look, right? Like these stairs feel kind of cute, kind of fun. You know, this is more like kind of like a Disney kind of aesthetic, whereas more of like a illumination might be more like 90-10. Like it's really pushed. Um, we'll talk about basic perspective, 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, and how to use it compositionally. You can really get lost in the weeds in perspective, and it's fine if you want to, but it's not actually necessary to know everything there is to know about perspective in order to work as a visual development artist. You need to know the basics, and really that's it. Overlap, even without much perspective knowledge, you can really create a sense of form with simply just overlap. What else? Types of lines, straight, curves, S curves, avoiding non-confident lines, airy lines, squiggle lines, how straights versus curves work to create, interesting shapes. So curve, straight, or simple, complex, right? Here we have some complexity. Here we have some simplicity. Proximity, we're just talking about this, right? Medium texture versus high texture. That helps the eye move across. When everything is super textured, it's really difficult for the eye to move through an image. You can see that here in some of this great work by Paul Felix, right? Here we got a little character. Here in this area, we have texture. And I think I can draw on this thing. I don't know how to draw on this anymore, but anyway. Right? Like no texture, so rest, interest, rest, interest. See how your eye bounces across that? If you were to cover this whole thing with texture, it would not read. Even here, even in a piece where there is more texture, these mountains have texture. This atmospheric cloudy fog creates visual rest. And here we have texture again, right? We have information versus no information. There's a reason why he put this here. Even if he didn't want this to be so cloudy, he would have made this less information here so that this can really pop. Here's some unity versus variety. A lot of unity makes something look really attractive, but also can be boring. When you add a pop of variety in it, it's very interesting. It has harmony. If you make everything if there's too much variety, there's no cohesion. Big, medium, and small. We'll talk about simplifying shapes into categories of big, medium, and small shapes. So you have not a whole range of different shapes, but groups of shapes, right? We'll talk about value, like rules of threes. That basically means that many of these design principles can be simplified into threes, like big, medium, small, background, middle ground, foreground, dark, medium, light. So we'll talk about, rendering. We'll talk about evidence of manufacture, right? Like how do you actually build something? Lashings, things like this. How to simplify what you see into basic forms, right? Like that might be a hatched roof or a thatched roof, right? But if you can simplify it into these basic forms, it's much more pleasing to look at. right? Stone walls, right? You can create a ribbon and then make it into stone. Windows and doors, right? They're not just flat. They actually fit into a surface. Everything has form. Everything has dimension. I see this one a lot. People are like, and here's a window. It's like, well, no, that's what a window would look like if it was drawn with chalk on the side of a wall, but that's not really what windows look like. This is really interesting. An eye path, right? You see here, we draw this roof. If you make more detail and more contrast within one area and then leave it less in another, this sort of implies the detail here. Like it's a way of getting away with doing more work with less. One, it helps your eye move through this much easier. And two, you don't need a fuss with all this out here, not nearly as much. It's like that can just kind of be roughed in. But if I put the detail here, my eye will just assume that same detail exists over here and over here. Principles of wonk, stretching, squashing, tilting, twisting. Too big on top. That's a good one. Like big old fat TV, little wheels. Having the feet too small, right? Or the wheels of a car or the legs or whatever it may be. And then simplification versus amplification, right? If you have a remote with like 100 buttons, it's funnier if it has like 2 or 3. Yeah. So choosing where to simplify, where to amplify. Like here's an old time TV. Here's a funnier TV. One big clunk, clunk, clunk. So yeah, these are the types of things, and there's a whole bunch more that we're going to be learning in this course. And then in the end, we're right at time. We're over time, but in the end, I want to help you guys create some nice mood paintings or drawings, and then as well as a lot of this kind of pre-production stuff. So at the end, not only will you have a couple to show in your portfolio, but you'll know how to do it. You'll know how to practice. And that's the problem with a lot of artists. They don't know what to practice in order to get them to that next level. So they draw what they're comfortable with, which sometimes is fan art or following trends. But this is the kind of practice that is going to really help you, land a job. So that is, and then I just wanted to share real quick that this is something I was going to demo, but we're out of time. But it's sort of my process for making pieces like this, which is digital, but it's meant to mimic kind of this graphite look, So yeah, I'll teach you guys that and all this other great stuff as well.